Okay, let me be real with you for a second. There's a specific kind of moment in sports that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a press conference or a formal introduction. It just happens. One day the numbers shift, the crowds change, the energy in a room feels different, and you look around and realize the sport you thought you knew has quietly been rearranged by someone you weren't fully paying attention to. That's what's happening in women's tennis right now. And the person at the center of it is a 20-year-old from Quezon City who most of the Western tennis world was not ready for. Her name is Alex. And if you don't know that name yet, I genuinely envy you, because you're about to discover one of the most compelling stories in professional sports, completely fresh. She is 20 years old. She is ranked 29th in the world. She is the highest-ranked Filipino player in the history of the WTA Tour. And she didn't get there by waiting her turn. She got there by walking into rooms she wasn't supposed to be in yet and absolutely refusing to leave quietly. Now, to really understand why this story matters, and I mean really matters, not just as a tennis story, but as a story about sports, culture, money, and institutional power, you need to go back to where she came from. Alex was born on May 23, 2005, in Quezon City, Philippines. She grew up in a country where tennis was always appreciated, but never fully claimed. People watched it. People respected it. But there was no homegrown name at the top of the sport, no face that 115 million people could look at and say that person is carrying something of ours. There was no "that's ours" moment.
Not yet.
And then Alex started winning. Her 2025 season wasn't a gradual progression. It wasn't a slow climb where analysts could track the trajectory and predict the ceiling. It was a detonation. She entered the Miami Open as a wild card, not a seed. Not a known quantity on the main circuit. A wild card. The kind of entry that usually means you're there to gain experience and lose in the early rounds with your head held high. That was the expectation. What actually happened was something else entirely. She beat the number 5 player in the world. Then she beat the number 2. Back to back. And she didn't stop there. She kept going until she reached the semi-final of a WTA 1000 event, one of the biggest tournaments on the calendar outside the Grand Slams. Think about what that image looks like. You come in through the side entrance, no fanfare, no expectation, and you leave having beaten players who had been at the top of the sport for years. That's not a Cinderella story. That's a statement. And the people watching knew it. In Manila, in Dubai, in Miami, in living rooms across Southeast Asia, across every time zone where the Filipino diaspora has built a home, people weren't just watching. They were feeling something. The electricity of watching someone who looks like you, who comes from where you come from, competing at a level nobody said was possible yet. And they showed up. Physically, in the stadiums. Digitally, on every platform. Commercially, in every way a fan base can move the needle. The sport was not prepared for the scale of it. Sky Sports presenter Gigi Salmon said something about Alex that I keep coming back to. She described her, on the record, as someone who might already be the biggest star in women's tennis. Might already be. That's not a projection. That's a journalist who watches this sport every single day, seeing what's in front of her and calling it honestly. And the evidence backed it up everywhere you looked. At the Australian Open, fans queued outside just to get into her matches. Not inside the stadium, outside the building, hoping to get in. In Abu Dhabi, in Manila, in Dubai. Every city she entered transformed. It stopped feeling like a tennis tournament and started feeling like a concert where the headliner happened to also be playing some of the best tennis on tour. And then came the merchandise numbers. This is the part of the story where everything gets more complicated. And honestly, more interesting. Because this is where the feel-good narrative of a young champion rising collides with something far less comfortable, the way institutions respond when reality stops matching their models. Picture a routine commercial review inside the WTA. Standard stuff. Executives in a room, spreadsheets on a screen, revenue figures organized by player name. These are names that have anchored the organization's marketing strategy for years. Grand Slam champions. Established stars. The faces the sport had been built around for a generation. And then one name sitting at the very top of the jersey and merchandise revenue column. A name that had no business being there by any conventional framework the institution had been operating under. Alex. Not second, not third, first, and not marginally first. We're talking about a player outside the top 25 generating merchandise revenue that exceeded the combined sales of 3 Grand Slam champions. Combined. The executives reportedly asked for the figures to be run again before anyone in the room said anything. Because what those numbers were describing didn't fit 20 years of commercial planning. It didn't fit the sport's existing hierarchy. It didn't fit the model at all. Except it was completely real. A limited edition Nike shirt dropped. It had her name on it. It had a sampaguita flower on it, the national flower of the Philippines, designed by Filipino artist Georgina Canis. It sold out across 4 continents in 48 hours. Nike responded the way Nike responds to things that actually move them, not with words but with placement. They put her portrait in the tunnel at their world headquarters in Oregon. The legendary tunnel. The one where the walls hold the faces of global ambassadors across every sport on the planet. The caption read, "History in full bloom." Nike does not make that call out of sentiment. Nike makes that call because the data tells them to. And the data here was not whispering. It was loud. The institutional response from the WTA, however, was something different. Something that, depending on how generously you want to interpret it, ranges from confusing to genuinely troubling. Instead of a celebration, what came out of the organization was described by multiple sources as a formal demand for investigation. Not into rule-breaking. Not into any kind of misconduct. An investigation into the commercial performance of their most commercially powerful active player. I want you to sit with that for a moment. They investigated why she was selling too many jerseys. The internal language used was merchandising equity. It sounds neutral when you say it out loud. It sounds administrative, procedural, the kind of phrase that makes something feel official and considered. But apply it to the context, and it starts to mean something very specific. What they were debating was whether Alex's commercial dominance was a natural market outcome or some kind of anomaly that needed to be examined, and the implication followed, managed. And the answer to that question, from anyone standing outside that conference room, is not complicated. The market wasn't malfunctioning. The market was doing exactly what markets do when they find something real. Something that connects. Something that resonates across cultures and languages and time zones. The market spoke. It spoke clearly. And it said her name. What made all of this land even harder was what was simultaneously happening on the promotional side of things. Fans started documenting a gap. A visible, screenshot-able, side-by-side comparable gap between what the market was saying about Alex and what the institution was reflecting back. WTA promotional emails going out to subscribers without her name in them, despite her leading merchandise sales by a distance. Homepage placements featuring players she had already beaten. Tournament feature articles where she appeared almost as an afterthought. The screenshots spread. The conversation picked up speed. And then it reached people with platforms large enough to turn the WTA's quiet internal debate into something very public and very loud. Social media in the Philippines is not a small thing. The Filipino online community is enormous and organized and deeply emotionally invested in this particular moment of history. When they saw the gap between what the market was saying and what the institution was showing them, they responded. Loudly. And everywhere. Former players started speaking. Tennis journalists started drawing comparisons nobody inside the WTA wanted drawn in public. The question being asked, carefully at first and then less carefully, was this. If her name were different, if her passport came from a different country, if her fan base was concentrated in Paris or London instead of Manila and Melbourne and Chicago, would the response to her commercial numbers have been an investigation or a feature story? These are uncomfortable questions. They're meant to be. The discomfort is the point. Because the point is not to assign blame to any one person in any one meeting room. The point is to look honestly at the gap between what the market said and how the institution responded, and ask what that gap reveals. What makes this whole story hit differently is that through all of it, Alex has been almost entirely somewhere else mentally. Not above it in an arrogant way. Just genuinely focused on something other than the noise. In her Vogue Philippines interview, and yes, she was on the cover of Vogue Philippines at 20 years old, she said something simple and completely unguarded. She said she wants to be a good person. That's it. No political framing. No calculated response to the narrative building around her. Just a 20-year-old from Quezon City talking about character, while an organization somewhere was debating her sales figures in a room she wasn't invited to. She was in Miami, preparing to compete again, carrying the weight of a nation's hope and pride with something everyone who has spent time around her describes the same way, a quiet and completely natural grace. And the results kept coming. She goes back to the streets of Quezon City where she grew up, and people recognize her outside restaurants she visited as a kid. She describes being famous at home as something she's still getting used to. That phrase, something to get used to, does a lot of work in a small space. Because she is simultaneously still the girl from Quezon City and one of the most commercially powerful athletes in women's sports right now. Both things are true at once. Both things are remarkable in completely different ways. The investigation, whatever shape it eventually took and whatever conclusion anyone reached inside it, ended up doing the precise opposite of what it seemed designed to do. It didn't quietly manage the commercial conversation around her. It blew that conversation wide open. International tennis media ran with it. Tennis 365, Tennis Head, Filipino sports outlets, global tennis communities across every major platform spent days pulling apart what it all meant. And the scrutiny that landed wasn't on Alex. It landed on the organization that had apparently decided a player selling out jerseys across 4 continents in under 2 days was something requiring examination rather than amplification. Private industry, meanwhile, moved faster and more honestly than the institution ever did. Nike had already acted. Babolat saw it. Globe Telecom, Bank of the Philippine Islands, sponsors across multiple sectors lined up and moved quickly and without hesitation. The commercial world looked at exactly what was in front of it and recognized it immediately. The institutional world took longer. And that hesitation told its own story, quietly but clearly. Here's what I think is worth saying out loud, because it's easy to get lost in the drama of investigations and merchandise figures and lose sight of the bigger picture. Pioneering moments in sport are never comfortable while they're happening. They're never smooth. The person breaking through is never handed an easy path or a warm welcome from the structures that existed before them. There are always gatekeepers. There are always processes built to serve an older order that moves slowly when a new one arrives. What's different about Alex's situation is the scale. 115 million people in the Philippines. A diaspora scattered across every major continent on Earth. A fan base that didn't just adopt tennis because of her. They built an entire relationship with the sport around her presence in it. When she's scheduled to play, stadiums fill. When she's not closing a session, empty seats follow. Tournament directors know this. Broadcast schedulers know this. The data is not subtle. And eventually institutions do catch up with data, even when they're reluctant to. Even when the process is slower and more fraught than it should have been. She enters the 2026 Miami Open seeded, ranked 29th in the world, returning to the same tournament where 12 months ago she walked in as a wild card and walked out having rearranged the furniture at the top of the sport. The first Filipino player to break into the top 30. The first to record multiple wins over top 10 players and Grand Slam champions. The first to reach a tour-level final in the Open era. The word first appears so often in her story that it eventually stops feeling like an achievement and starts feeling like just who she is. History has a pattern with people like this. It questions them first. It audits them. It tries to fit what it's seeing into a framework it already understands. And when it can't, it attempts to contain it. Then, eventually, when the numbers are too loud to argue with and the moment is too big to manage, it celebrates them. Alex is still in the questioning phase. The celebrating is coming. You can feel it building. She said in that same Vogue interview that she's proud of herself and what she's accomplished. Proud of her team. Grateful for the work everyone around her has put in. No anger underneath it. No score to settle. Just gratitude and an appetite for whatever comes next. The investigation into her jersey sales will be filed somewhere and eventually forgotten by most of the people who were in the room for it. But the jerseys themselves, the ones with the Sampaguita flower, the ones with a Filipino name across the back, those are on people's shoulders right now. In Manila, in Miami, in Dubai, in Auckland. in cities where women's tennis was never supposed to reach this deep or mean this much. She didn't just outsell a roster. She expanded the universe of people who care about this sport. She gave 115 million people a reason to set an alarm at 3 in the morning. She gave the Filipino diaspora something to wear with genuine pride. And she did all of it at 20 years old, without a Grand Slam title, with nothing but talent and hunger, and the kind of character that makes even a fashion magazine interview feel like a real conversation. So here's the question that this entire story eventually sits you down and forces you to answer. When the market speaks this clearly, when a 20-year-old from Quezon City makes every sponsor and every stadium and every broadcast screen light up in ways the institution never planned for, what does the organization do with that? Does it protect the old structures because they're familiar? Or does it evolve to actually deserve the moment it's been handed? The next chapter of the story is being written right now, on courts in Miami, in the offices of sponsors who don't need to be told twice, in the living rooms of Southeast Asia, where someone is setting that 3 a.m. alarm again, in the heart of a nation watching one of their own rewrite what's possible. You cannot investigate a movement. You can try, but the movement just keeps moving.